The bright autumn light flooding the porch suddenly dimmed. Marmalade, caught off guard in a half-doze, twitched and let out a small yelp as Ivan's huge gray figure loomed over him, casting a bleak shadow. Up until that moment, everything had been as usual. The cat was lying in a patch of gold, listening to the familiar grumbling of his old owner working in the shed. He was full and content. Just another quiet day in house number 12. But now the habitual grumbling was replaced by a sharp mechanical motion. Ivan neither hit nor yelled, he simply acted. The cat didn't even have time to get his bearings before he was picked up, squirming and meowing, and shoved into a narrow cardboard box. Inside, it smelled of old newspaper and something sharp and dusty, like forgotten attic junk. This didn't feel like a game. Marmalade lunged at the only crack in the cardboard, but a powerful hand pressed the lid down. It all happened in a matter of seconds. The air thickened, the sound became muffled, and one thought hammered in the cat's head. This isn't a game, this is terrifying. He tried to dig his claws in, but there was only smooth, soulless cardboard beneath them. Ivan was a man of about 65, a weather-beaten oak, powerful, sinewy, with a face crisscrossed with wrinkles, like cracks in bark. Now his face was blank, as if completely wiped clean. He wasn't looking at the box he held tucked under his arm, nor was he reacting to the wild, fear-filled cries coming from inside. This silence was more frightening than any anger. Ivan always either swore or laughed. This dead silence meant a break had occurred. Something irreparable had broken. The man left the house, stepped onto the creaking porch, and even in the locked box, Marmalade felt the familiar scent of earth and dried autumn leaves that had soaked into his paws. They always walked this yard together. He approached the old Chevy. The car, which seemed to be older than the cat himself, had its trunk creak open. Ivan, without lowering his head, tossed the box onto the back seat. He tossed it carelessly, but not cruelly, like something heavy that just needed to be moved. The driver's door slammed shut. Then the key sharply turned in the ignition. The engine sputtered, coughed, and finally caught, filling the air with the sharp smell of gasoline and exhaust. Inside the box, a real hell began. Marmalade, who was being shaken and thrown around every corner, desperately scratched the walls. "Master, what did I do?" His cries weren't heard, but the cat poured all his pain and incomprehension into them. "Why are you doing this?" The car heavily rolled out onto the road. The country road, covered in potholes, made the cardboard prison bounce. Suddenly, after a series of turns, the movement became smoother, and the engine's roar louder. This meant one thing: they were on the highway. Ivan drove silently, his teeth clenched. Over one of the bumps, the box slid slightly, and Marmalade heard his owner quietly, hoarsely exhale, "I'm sorry." The sound was so faint that the cat couldn't be sure it was addressed to him. But even that weak sound didn't give Marmalade peace. This was his human, his Ivan, the one who always fed him, stroked him with a rough but gentle hand, the one who shared his last piece of fish, the one who, in winter, sat him on his lap by the warm wood-burning stove, where it smelled of burning wood and tobacco. Now this man was taking him somewhere, punishing him, and the cat couldn't understand for what sin. Maybe he caught a mouse in the wrong spot, or meowed too loudly at night. Fear mixed with a sense of betrayal. It became hard to breathe. The fur on his scruff stood on end, and his tongue stuck to his palate from dehydration and terror. The car's vibration was monotonous, hypnotic, but every jerk in the cardboard box echoed with sharp pain in his head. The walls of the prison became damp from the cat's breath. At some point, as the car went to pass another vehicle, Marmalade couldn't take it anymore. He put all his strength and fury into one leap, and his trembling body slammed against the lid. The cardboard tore. A wild, piercing shriek burst from the opening into the cabin. Not just a meow, but the cry of a tiny creature that feels its life is ending. Ivan yanked the steering wheel. He slammed on the brakes. The tires screeched, and Marmalade's body tumbled across the back seat, hitting the seatback. The sharp smell of rubber and dust hung in the air. The man froze. His elbows were locked on the steering wheel. The cat saw the back of his head, the stiff gray hair, the tense neck. Ivan didn't turn around. He sat like that, his hands tightly clenched, for almost a minute. Inside the box, Marmalade quieted down. He felt his tiny heart pounding, felt the painful burning on his neck where the collar rope had tightened during the impact. He waited for his owner to turn around, to say, "That's enough, you goof!" and to pet him. But Ivan didn't move. Finally, the man took a deep breath. His shoulders seemed to slump even lower. He slowly lifted his foot from the brake, and the car, slightly shuddering, picked up speed again. The road was now smooth, paved. This was a strange place, a big city Marmalade had never known. The cat lay breathing heavily, listening to the uniform hum of the engine. Fear had dried him to the last drop, but now he was no longer furious, just numb. He simply waited for what would happen next. Tall concrete structures flashed past the window. They had been driving for a long time, and the air in the box felt thick and hot. The car turned off the wide road, passing huge, brightly lit windows. Through the smell of gasoline, a new, enticing scent suddenly broke through, hot bread and fresh pastries. Marmalade lifted his head, sniffing the foreign city smell. The car slowed down. The bumps on the asphalt became quieter, scraping. Ivan began to park. Marmalade tensed his muscles, preparing for a new dash. He didn't know what awaited him, but instinct screamed, "Run! As soon as the door opens!" The brakes screeched. The engine died. Ivan turned his head, but only to make sure no one was nearby. Then he opened the door. Fresh but unfamiliar air rushed into the cabin. "Master, I'm here." "Wait! Where are you going?" Marmalade's cry was not just a sound. It was an inner scream, a mix of pain, panic, and absolute pleading. He thrashed in the box when Ivan sharply stopped the car. "Open up! Let's go home. I'm hungry. This is a strange smell." Ivan didn't answer, and Marmalade understood. This isn't a fight. This is something else. This was the silence that walls reply with. The cat desperately lunged at the torn crack in the cardboard. "What are you looking for? Did you forget something? Come back." At that moment, the box jerked, and his owner roughly pulled him out. The cold, damp city air hit his nose, smelling of gasoline, fried onions, and dampness. Marmalade instinctively dug his claws into the sleeve of Ivan's old jacket, but the strong, large hand simply shook him off like dust. The man, breathing heavily, stood in the middle of an unwelcoming space in front of a store's facade. It was just past 7 in the morning. The streetlights were still on, but the city was already waking up. In the distance, the roar of cars echoed, and somewhere nearby, a gate creaked. Ivan crouched down on one knee. His movements were jerky, as if he was afraid that if he slowed down, he wouldn't be able to finish what he started. The cat saw the rope, a thick, rough twine firmly tied to his old leather collar. Ivan took the free end and, without looking at the cat, quickly and forcefully wrapped it around a post. The post, covered with peeling gray paint, stood by the entrance. At Ivan's eye level hung a faded, unwanted, "Janitor Wanted" sign. The man tightened the knot. His fingers weren't trembling. They were hard as stone, performing a monstrously difficult task. As soon as the rope slackened, Marmalade lunged to the side. He pulled with all his might, thinking it was just another obstacle. The rope tightened, painfully digging into his neck beneath the collar, and the cat fell. He choked. His vision darkened. He tried to get up, but could only crawl back to the post. Ivan stood a few steps away. His back was tense. He wasn't looking at the cat, but the back of his head, his stiff gray hair, seemed wet with strain. In the distance, footsteps could be heard. Someone was walking by. Ivan flinched. "See, he's looking for me. He's going to untie me now." At that moment, Marmalade saw a flicker of hope, but Ivan did something worse. He didn't turn around. He simply shoved the empty cardboard box away with his foot so it wouldn't be in the way, and quickly, almost running, headed toward his old car. He didn't look to see who was coming. He didn't care. He just wanted to disappear. The sight of his owner's receding back broke Marmalade. He forgot about the pain, the rope, the fear. He sprang up and started to scream. It was a wild, inhuman, despairing howl with which he seemed to be trying to stop time. "Don't go! I love you! What did I do?" He stretched with his whole body, straining his back muscles, trying to reach the retreating figure with his paws. Every attempt to lunge tightened the rope. He felt the rough twine cutting into his skin, how hard it was to breathe. His breathing became erratic, wheezing. His heart pounded somewhere in his throat. He thrashed around in his tiny circle outlined by the rope. A passer-by, a woman in her 40s in a worn jacket, walked hunched over, not lifting her eyes. She barely glanced at Ivan, who almost ran into the driver's door. She didn't even notice the cat struggling frantically by the post. Her indifference was perhaps worse than cruelty. Ivan got into the car. The engine roared to life. Marmalade saw his profile. His eyes were closed, his lips pressed into a thin white line. The man quickly backed up, spun around sharply, and the car, leaving a puff of grayish smoke behind it, disappeared around the corner. He didn't look back. Marmalade's cry cut off. He collapsed onto the icy asphalt, breathing heavily. The rope, a means of transportation a few minutes ago, was now a symbol of betrayal. His body twitched nervously. He lay there, and his side still retained the warmth from Ivan's hands, but in his head there was an icy, deafening cold. The strange city roared around him. The passing woman had already walked by without looking back. Her footsteps faded. Only silence and the monotonous hum of the waking city remained. Marmalade tried to stand up. He felt a sharp pain in his neck and realized he couldn't free himself. The sun rose higher but brought no warmth. He was here, tied up, alone. The night felt long and terrifying, and this pain was only the beginning. Why? This thought pounded in his head, hot and sharp, like a shard of glass. Marmalade couldn't understand. He was a good cat. He always came when he was called, caught mice in the basement. And when Ivan sat by the stove, Marmalade would settle on his knees and purr to warm the old man. They were one. The old man and the even older cat. A quiet life in house number 12. Every morning began with the smell of burning wood and old tobacco and ended with the crunch of dried fish. I didn't do anything wrong. I didn't run away. Why did he leave me? Why did he drive away? The world around him became flat, gray, and alien. No smell of familiar earth, no warmth of the stove, only the cold asphalt that seeped through his thin fur. and the rope that pulled back, not allowing him to even turn to face the wall. Despair was not an emotion, but a physical sensation, a heaviness in his paws, dryness in his mouth, and a constant dull pain at the base of his neck where the twine was stretched tight. He closed his eyes and desperately searched his memory for what was before. The sun quickly left, taking with it the last crumbs of hope. Now night reigned, not the quiet, safe night in Petrovka, where the only sound was the creaking of the old door, but this cold, roaring night, filled with strange, unsettling city sounds. The city evening began with a sharp metallic sound. A garbage truck rumbled down the alley. Then a strong, piercing wind picked up, which cut through his short fur to his very skin. Frost bit his paw pads. Marmalade trembled not only from the cold, but from the tension. He tucked his paws under himself, trying to preserve warmth, but the cold, damp concrete drew it out. The rope on his neck, thick and rough, didn't allow him to lie comfortably or relax. He constantly felt its pressure. The old leather collar that Ivan had made for him 3 years ago now felt like iron. Hunger was a dull, growing ache, but it was nothing compared to the thirst. His tongue stuck to his palate. Marmalade began to struggle. He instinctively tried to break free, as if it were a hunter's trap. He first pulled forward, then backward. He started spinning around the post, but the rope only twisted tighter, restricting his movement. He pulled until the rope was taut as a wire. His neck began to throb piercingly. He could hear his heavy, broken breathing. He tried to pick at the knot with a claw, but it was useless. The knot was tight, wet with his saliva and the rain that had started to drizzle. It's not true. He'll come back. He forgot me, but he'll remember. He recalled the warmth again. The memory was so vivid that for a moment he could smell Ash and Ivan. They were sitting by the stove, and Ivan, whose hands were as hard as an oak trunk, was slowly stroking his back. "Oh, Marmalade, my ginger nobleman, you don't need anything but warmth," Ivan had whispered then. Now Marmalade needed more than just warmth. He needed freedom, water, and most importantly, his human. He realized he would either break free or the rope would strangle him. His last dash was an act of desperation. He pushed off the asphalt with all 4 paws and lunged forward to the spot where Ivan's car had stood. It felt as if his neck was being sliced by a thin, sharp blade. A sudden, unbearable pain burned his skin. A salty taste appeared in his mouth. The rope didn't break. Instead, he felt something shift beneath the collar. His skin, chafed and inflamed, cracked under the tension. He thought he went deaf in one ear. Black spots flashed before his eyes. He collapsed. His body was powerless, shaken by large, uncontrollable tremors. He lay with his neck outstretched, unable even to turn his head to look around. He couldn't scream anymore. His throat burned as if he had swallowed sand. The asphalt beneath him was wet and icy. The smell of gasoline left by the Chevy felt like a mockery, a subtle, bitter reminder of the one who had abandoned him. The only thing he could do was press his head to the ground. No movement, no sounds. The city indifferently roared with its life, completely unaware of the small, dying creature by the post. From exhaustion and unbearable pain, his muscles finally gave up. The cat stopped trembling, but it brought no relief. It was the onset of numbness. He felt his strength draining away, felt the heaviness pressing on his eyelids. He no longer thought of Ivan, no longer thought of home. He thought only of how good it would be if this cold, this pain, this crushing nightmare would just stop. He drifted into a shallow, anxious sleep, but even in his dreams, the rope didn't let go. Memories of warmth and care mixed with the smell of gasoline and trash. He dreamed he was running across the warm porch, but the rope kept pulling him back until he was left alone, tied to an old cold tree, in complete solitude. And so it continued until morning. A sharp, piercing female voice burst into his anxious, cold sleep. "God! Who would do such a thing?" Marmalade twitched. The unfamiliar, frightened sound was so close that the cat instinctively pressed his head to the asphalt. He wasn't asleep. He was simply existing in a stupor from which the cry pulled him out. He felt someone standing nearby. Unfamiliar smells of perfume and fresh coffee. The cat lifted his head and saw a pair of clean white sneakers. Then something completely unexpected happened. A warm, soft touch on his back. Not Ivan's hand, but something gentle, cautious. The woman knelt down. He felt her warm breath touch his fur. "Poor thing. Who did this to you?" The woman, young, in her 30s, cautiously reached out to the rope. Instead of gratitude or joy, Marmalade felt only a sharp, piercing fear. He immediately reacted to the intrusion into his pain. His whiskers twitched, his back arched, and he let out a low, guttural hiss. It wasn't a sound of aggression, but the cry of a cornered creature that had decided, "Any contact is pain." The woman withdrew her hand, but didn't back away. Her face, framed by light hair, was an expression of pure horror and pity. "Shh, shh. I don't want to hurt you. I'm just going to untie this," she said. Her voice was soft, calming, but to Marmalade it was as alien as the cold concrete. She stood up and found a piece of brick on the ground. Marmalade watched as she, crouching a few steps away, began to scrape the rope with the brick. The sound was nasty, rough, but it meant liberation. "Be careful," a male voice, likely belonging to her companion, said from behind. "He's crazy. Look how he's hissing." "He's not crazy, he's terrified," the woman snapped, not stopping her work. "Look at his neck. He was being choked." Marmalade felt the thick twine giving way. Finally, there was a quiet, saving snap. The loop loosened. Freedom. The woman slowly moved away. She waited. The cat felt that he was no longer tied to the post. The rope fell to the ground, leaving a deep, bloody mark on his neck. Freedom was not felt as relief, but as shock. Marmalade didn't know what to do with this space. The only thing he knew was that this man, Ivan, had left him here, and he had to find him or run. Instead of approaching the woman, he leaped. He darted away from the post, away from this woman, away from the smells of coffee and perfume, and ran as far as his weakened but still tenacious paws would allow. He ran into the narrow passageway between the store and the garages. Concrete. It smelled of rotting potatoes and motor oil there, but it was the smell of a refuge. He stopped, squeezed behind a tall, overturned trash bin, and froze. He heard the woman calling him, "Kitty, kitty, come on, I'll feed you." But her voice was just another sound of a strange, dangerous world. The next 2 weeks were a descent into complete savagery. Marmalade didn't sleep. Hunger and fear replaced sleep and rest. He became part of this new, dirty world. He discovered that as a house cat, he was completely unable to survive. His soft paws, accustomed to the clean floor of house number 12, were now burning from the cold, dirty asphalt. His fur was matted, wet, and dull. He was limping on his back paw after a fight with a large local gray tomcat. He was afraid not only of people, but of smells. The smell of fried onions and meat from the cafeteria made him salivate, but he couldn't get closer than 15 paces. The smell of gasoline and the loud roar of an engine made his body shrink and seek a hiding place. His stomach clung to his spine. Every step was difficult due to exhaustion. He felt a constant pulsating pain in his healing but inflamed neck. When he tried to groom himself, his own tongue burned his dry, cracked skin. He had lost his pride. To keep from freezing, he had to sleep in drainpipes. During those 2 weeks, he tried to approach a human a couple of times. He saw a man who looked like Ivan, about the same age, a similar jacket. Marmalade walked up, meowed thinly, pitifully, and lifted his head. The man looked at him. "Get out of here, you flea bag," he said, and waved his hand. The cat retreated. A new, terrible truth was cemented in his mind. A human, even one who resembled his owner, now equaled pain. He sat under a rusty metal downspout, curled up into a tight, trembling ball, and watched the world. He stopped crying, stopped calling. He became quiet, almost invisible. He was a house cat thrown into the wild, and the wild was squeezing him with iron tongs. He was still holding on by instinct, but something inside him had broken. He no longer looked for Ivan. He simply looked for an end to the pain. One evening, when the streetlights were already on, he came out of his shelter, feeling that if he waited any longer, he wouldn't be able to take another step. In the distance, near the apartment building entrance, he saw a woman and a small human. The woman was carrying bags, and the small human was laughing. Marmalade slowly crawled towards them, not in the hope of rescue, but because his instinct pushed him towards the only familiar thing, human warmth. He was too exhausted to hiss. He simply crawled. Just 2 months ago, the world was enclosed in the cat and Ivan. A narrow, warm circle of the smell of the stove, clean fur, and a guaranteed bowl. There was comfort and predictability where the most terrible danger was a mouse that barely ran. The mouse that ran into the crawl space had become a dirty, unstoppable whirlpool. His life was now measured not in hours spent in the sun, but in the number of days lived without food and the proximity of shelter. Now he was only a dull, ginger echo of his former self. His fur was matted, stained with motor oil and dampness. He moved, barely lifting his paws, dragging a body that could no longer resist. There was an inflamed, itching wound on his neck under the old collar. He was the embodiment of exhaustion. It was at this moment that the contrast hit him with new force. He felt the smell of cleanliness and warmth emanating from a pair of new footsteps. The cat froze. He was lying under a rosehip bush right by the entrance. The wind brought the sharp smell of exhaust fumes, but through it broke an aroma he barely remembered: laundry detergent, fresh bread, and a little sweet chocolate. A woman with a boy stopped at the entrance. The woman, in her 30s, with a tired, kind face, was carrying heavy grocery bags that were digging into her wrists. This was Olivia. Beside her, slightly behind, walked a boy of about 13, Art. He was preoccupied with his phone, but suddenly stopped. "Mom, look!" Art lowered his phone, his eyes wide, fixed on the ginger lump under the bush. "Look how miserable he is." Olivia set the bags down on the asphalt. The bags rustled, and the cat instinctively flattened his ears. "Good heavens!" Olivia slowly crouched down, avoiding any sudden movements. "What are you doing here, Ginger?" The cat, exhausted and frightened, first reacted with his old self-defense instinct. He let out a quiet, cracked hiss, barely audible from the depths of his throat. "He's hissing. Mom, leave him." Art's voice held fear mixed with pity. Olivia ignored her son. She pushed a strand of hair from her forehead and slowly, very slowly, reached out her hand to the cat. Her hand was rough but warm, smelling of citrus and a bit of hand lotion. She didn't try to grab him. She simply held her palm open at his eye level. "I won't hurt you." "I see you've been here a long time," she whispered. "Come to me, please." It wasn't an invitation, but a quiet plea. The cat looked at her hand. His muscles, accustomed to tension and flight, didn't obey. He wanted to run away, to hide, but hunger and cold were stronger. His eyelids drooped. Slowly, overcoming the fear that had become part of his being, the cat took a step. He dragged his injured paw, then another. He felt a sharp pain in his neck, but no longer paid attention to it. He buried his head in her palm. It was the first human touch without roughness in many weeks. Olivia immediately picked him up. This moment was the peak of tension. The cat was in her arms, but his brain was still screaming, "Run! Danger!" When Olivia lifted him, the cat felt his stomach muscles cramp. He wasn't used to being picked up. His body was light, like a pile of wet leaves. Olivia felt it right away. She pressed him to her chest, and the cat felt her heart beating rapidly and heavily. "My God, you're weightless!" Her voice trembled, and she hugged him tighter. "He must have been a house cat. Who would do this to him?" Art stepped closer, looking over his mother's shoulder. The sight of the cat, dirty and thin, caused him not disgust, but shock. "Mom, he's all dirty." The boy cautiously reached out a finger to stroke the matted fur. "That doesn't matter. What matters is that he's alive." Olivia lifted her head and looked at Art. There was determination in her eyes. "He won't survive here. We can't leave him." Art nodded. His voice became firm. All doubts vanished. "Mom, let's take him. We'll nurse him back to health." Olivia pressed the cat even closer and, ignoring the weight of the bags, stood up. She felt her wrists, squeezed by the bag handles, ache. But it didn't matter. Now she was carrying not just groceries, but a new life. They slowly entered the apartment building. The warmth of the hallway, which was usually just part of the way home, now seemed like a luxury. The cat quieted down. His body, tense just a minute ago, began to relax slightly, warming against Olivia's warm, beating chest. He felt a strong, unfamiliar smell, but it was the smell of safety. He heard Olivia's quiet, soothing voice, whispering something to him, and felt Art's cautious hand on his back, but in this moment of safety the cat felt no peace. He felt something inside, deep in his consciousness, clench into a tight ball. "I am being carried home," he thought. Marmalade. That was his internal name, but which home? The one from which Ivan drove him out, or this one, this strange one? He couldn't answer, but for the first time in many days a tiny irrational hope appeared, like a ray of light piercing his black, dirty world. They entered the apartment. The door closed, cutting off the sounds of the street. A sterile, sharp smell of chlorine and alcohol cut through the thick, sweet aroma of calming herbs that seemed to hang in the air in dense layers. This was a veterinary clinic, a place where pain and hope overlapped like layers of old paint. The walls in the waiting room were painted a soft, pale green, which was supposed to be calming but only heightened the sense of anxiety. To the right, an old cracked refrigerator with vaccines hummed. To the left, a wall timer ticked quietly. The cold, slippery linoleum beneath Olivia and Art's feet seemed completely alien to the dirty, matted fur of the ginger cat. The cat sat on Olivia's lap, wrapped in an old blanket. He wasn't crying, but his breathing was shallow, interrupted. Art sat next to her, his back rigidly straight, gently stroking his head. This place was clean and safe, but it foreshadowed a new pain that the cat could no longer endure. They were called in. The veterinarian, a large, tired man with kind eyes, immediately took the cat for examination. His touch was professional and quick. The cat didn't resist. He simply froze like a statue, letting out only a barely audible hoarse moan when the doctor palpated his sides. Exhaustion, severe dehydration. "He's 8 years old, no less," the veterinarian quietly stated, writing something on the chart. "Limping. And right here, on his neck." He carefully moved aside the dirty, matted fur, exposing the skin. The rope marks were terrible, a deep red-blue trace that was already starting to fester. But what the veterinarian saw beneath that was even stranger. Under the dirty, embedded twine hid an old, worn, handmade leather collar. It was almost black with dirt and ingrained dampness. "And what is this?" Olivia leaned closer. Her elbows were bent. The veterinarian cut the old, embedded rope with difficulty. When it fell, the cat flinched but didn't run away. The doctor gently removed the collar. "Here, take a look." The veterinarian handed the collar to Olivia. The leather was thick, not factory-made, with uneven but neat stitching. The cat was clearly well cared for, very much a house cat. Someone threw him out. "Threw him out!" Olivia felt the blood rush to her face. She squeezed the collar in her hand, feeling the rough texture of the old leather. How could anyone do this to an animal? He could have died from choking or starvation. "Don't be angry." Art touched his mother's hand, his eyes full of tears. "The important thing is we found him." "Yes, the important thing is you found him," the doctor agreed. "We'll remove the collar. It's only bothering him now. Next, antibiotics, an IV for recovery, and lots of food." "But slowly." Olivia nodded. She placed the old damp-smelling collar into a bag as if it were evidence. At that moment, her heart was filled with rage at the unknown monster and immense pity for the defenseless cat. The rest of the day was spent on treatment. The IV the veterinarian put in seemed like torture to Olivia, but the cat accepted it with surprising submission. He lay under a soft blanket, and the warm, nourishing fluid slowly, drop by drop, penetrated his desiccated body. Later, at home in the bathroom, Olivia carefully began to wash the dirt off him. When the water touched his wounds, the cat quietly hissed. His body was covered in old healed scars from street fights, but the rope marks were the most terrifying. Every millimeter of skin in that area was burning. Olivia felt her elbows ache from leaning over the tub for so long, but she continued. Finally, when the dirty water had drained, the cat was transformed. His fur, though thin, shone again with a bright, vibrant ginger. He truly was a handsome cat. Art sat on the floor beside him, holding a clean piece of chicken. "You're with us now, Ginger." "You'll live here," the boy whispered, gently stroking his back, where the dirt was gone. The cat tasted the food for the first time, but only took a tiny piece. He began to lick his dry lips. He had regained consciousness, but his behavior was strange. He didn't purr, didn't rub against them. He looked at the window, then at the door. His whiskers twitched with tension at every sound. He looked well cared for, but something inside him was broken, and both of them felt it. Olivia carried the washed and fed cat into the living room. She placed him on a soft rug by the radiator. The warmth enveloped him. The cat immediately felt better, but instantly got up. He didn't stay by the radiator. He slowly, slightly limping, walked to the front door, stood next to it, and lay down on the floor. In complete silence, he put his head on the floor, his nose pointed directly at the gap under the door, where a draft was coming from. Olivia, watching him, felt her joy of rescue replaced by a heavy, oppressive feeling. She walked over, sat down, and quietly, almost to herself, said, "Are you waiting?" "Yes, you're waiting for him." The cat didn't react. He just lay there, listening to the sounds outside, to every step on the landing. He was safe, but his heart was tied to something else. Olivia's apartment smelled of cleanliness, vanilla, and freshness. This was a home, not a shelter. 2 months passed, and these 2 months were a time of careful nursing. The cat, whom they now affectionately called Peach, no longer limped. His fur had grown thick, becoming bright, shiny, almost orange, like a ripe fruit. He had gained weight, and a thoughtful, though sad, look appeared in his eyes. However, despite the warmth, food, and care, an invisible, oppressive atmosphere of waiting hung in this house. Peach was here, but didn't belong to this place. His body was fed and groomed, but his spirit remained locked somewhere else, by the cold post. Every evening, precisely at 7 o'clock, when the sun set and the automatic lights came on in the hallway, Peach would stop whatever he was doing. He would leave his food bowl, refuse to play with Art, and slowly, with the dignity of an old cat, walk to the front door. He would lie down with his nose to the threshold. He wasn't sleeping, he was listening. Every creak of the elevator, every sound of footsteps on the landing made him lift his head. In those moments, his whiskers would start to tremble and his pupils would dilate. He was waiting for the familiar, heavy, slightly shuffling step and the familiar smell of gasoline and old tobacco that always accompanied Ivan. Art watched him for hours. The boy, who was initially just happy to have a live cat, now felt that his affection was unrequited. "Peach," Art would call him quietly, trying to lure him with a piece of ham. "What are you waiting for? Come eat." Peach wouldn't move. He would just slightly lower his ears, showing that he heard, but couldn't be distracted from his task. Olivia stood in the kitchen doorway, leaning against the jamb, watching the scene. Her heart ached. "Mom, he's looking for someone," Art said, lowering his hand. Olivia walked over, sat down next to her son, and hugged him. "Who? The one who abandoned him? Hasn't he realized that person betrayed him? Maybe he thinks that person will come back and take him?" Art suggested. "He won't come back, sweetie." "That's why he left him, so he wouldn't come back," Olivia said, stroking the cat's warm, clean back. One of those evenings, when the waiting was especially agonizing, Peach suddenly jumped up. A male voice echoed on the landing. The neighbor had returned from work. The cat darted to the door, letting out a thin, barely audible meow that was full of hope. But when a key turned in the neighboring door and a strange, careless laugh rang out, he stopped. His shoulders slumped, and he lay down on the floor again. It irritated Olivia that the cat didn't accept their love. He was affectionate, allowed himself to be petted, and slept on their beds, but his behavior lacked sincere feline devotion. She felt that all these gifts, the soft blankets, the tasty food, were only a temporary substitute for what he had lost. "We are just a comfortable foster home for him," she thought bitterly, watching the cat lie down with his nose to the door once again. She knew that most abandoned animals forget their owners after a week. But this cat, this old, wise Peach, remembered. He wasn't just waiting, he was performing a daily ritual of fidelity that tore at Olivia's heart. She felt not like a savior, but an impostor in his life. In the 3rd month he began to do it less often. He might give in to Art's coaxing, might linger by his bowl, but whenever twilight fell and drafts began to swirl in the hallway, his gaze would become vacant. His purr, when Olivia stroked him, was loud, but it seemed to come not from him, but from deep in his stomach, without joy or engagement in his eyes. He was alive, but something inside him was broken, something that couldn't be healed with food or warmth. Days passed. The yellow leaves outside the window were replaced by snow, and then again by dirty, melting asphalt. Habituation to the new home slowly, with great difficulty, began to triumph over the pain of betrayal. Peach no longer jumped up at every step on the stairs. Sometimes he even fell asleep by the door, but it wasn't anxious sleep, but exhaustion. Olivia noticed that he began to sleep curled up in a tight, dense ball. Earlier he would sleep sprawled out on Ivan's porch, completely relaxed. Now he always kept his paws tucked under himself. It was not only a physical, but a psychological reflex. Always be ready to run. She looked at him with love, realizing that his body was saved, but his heart would forever remain with the old man and the old house. She accepted it. She loved him even so, but she didn't know the whole truth, and Peach continued to wait. Olivia, a woman of 35, looked older over the past 8 months, but not because of wrinkles. She had acquired that special, tired patience that comes to a person who has taken responsibility for someone else's broken life. The love she felt for Peach was not enthusiastic, but rather affirming. She knew she was doing good, and it became part of her routine. She accepted the fact that he would never just be her cat. He was a cat with a history, with a past that lay by her door every night. There was no more rage at the unknown monster in her, only a quiet, sad certainty that she had been given a heart that she wouldn't be able to fully heal. Peach got used to it. This was the saddest word in their home. The walls, the furniture, the smells. Everything became habitual. He stopped sleeping with his paws tucked in and began to eat with an appetite. And sometimes he even allowed himself to relax, lying on the back of the sofa, bathed in sunlight. He was handsome as ever. Orange fur, a powerful body that had gained weight, a calm, measured stride. But the ritual at the door didn't disappear. It simply changed. Now he didn't sit there for 2 hours waiting for footsteps. He would walk to the door, sniff the gap, quietly, as if to himself, meow once or twice, and then walk away. It was like a quiet, resigned laying of flowers on the grave of the past. Art, who was now almost 13, became more grown up and less attentive to the cat. His interests shifted to friends and the internet. He loved Peach, but he no longer sat with him for hours, no longer tried to entertain him as he had in the first months. "Mom, he's there again," Art said one evening, without even looking away from his laptop screen. He no longer tried to call him. "I know, son, it's his thing," Olivia replied, dusting. "He's waiting for that person. He's not waiting for salvation. He's waiting for closure that will never come." Olivia corrected herself silently. This was her main discovery. Peach wasn't waiting for warmth, but for an explanation for his exile. There was no explanation. Olivia loved him for this stubbornness. She loved his calmness, his quiet strength. But when she stroked him and he purred, she felt the purr came from his body, but not from his eyes. His eyes remained strangely calm, devoid of the cat's playful spark. He was obedient but not devoted, calm but not happy. She got used to this internal distance. She knew that in essence they lived side by side, but in different worlds. Her world was her family and work. His world was the empty place by the post where his former owner would never return. The past trailed Peach with an invisible thread. He never played with new toys. He preferred to sleep on the old, ugly, but soft blanket that Olivia brought from her mother's farm. One night, there was a heavy downpour accompanied by a thunderstorm. Peach woke up to the thunder. Instead of hiding under the bed, as most cats do, he darted into the hallway. Olivia woke up to a sharp thud. She found Peach by the front door. He wasn't scratching or howling, he was simply and desperately banging his head against the wooden surface. It was a silent, terrifying action. Olivia ran over and scooped him up in her arms. The cat didn't resist, but his body was trembling. "Shh, sweetie, shh." She held him close, and she herself cried from helplessness. When the storm subsided and Peach calmed down a bit, she carried him to the bedroom. She looked at his neck. Beneath the beautiful thick fur, she saw that the rope mark had completely healed, but a small, hard callus remained as a testament to that night. Autumn came, the same time of year the cat had been brought. The air smelled of wet asphalt and rotting leaves. Olivia watched Peach. The thought came to her, "He looks better than ever. He is healthy, but he is a living monument to his own grief." He had resigned himself. He had found a place where he was warm, but he hadn't found a person he could trust completely. She felt she had to do something that would break him out of this Groundhog Day. Her gaze fell on a bag lying on the top shelf in the closet where she kept old medications. There lay the very dirty, old, handmade collar that the veterinarian had removed from the cat 8 months ago. She had never touched it since that day. Olivia thought that if she cleaned it and put it on Peach, it might break his ritual. It would remind him of the one who had abandoned him so that he could finally let go of the past. She took out the bag. The collar was heavy, stiff, and smelled of dust. Olivia took the old collar out of the bag. It was dirty and hardened, but now, in the warmth of the apartment, the damp smell was replaced by a faint, bitter aroma of old, tanned leather and a little tobacco. She took it to the bathroom and began to clean it. Hot water softened the leather, and Olivia scrubbed it with a stiff brush, trying to get rid of the ingrained street dirt. When the collar dried a little, she noticed that it consisted of 2 layers of leather, carelessly but firmly stitched together. The seam was handmade, rough. At one point, when she pressed on it, trying to bend it, she heard a quiet, dry crunch. Olivia stopped. That sound was strange. She took a pair of manicure scissors, carefully lifted the wide, uneven seam on the inside of the collar, and began to unpick it. The leather was thick, layered. When she was finally able to separate them, a thin, 4-folded piece of yellowed newspaper fell out of the slit. The paper was old, crumpled. There were spots on it that looked like dried water droplets, but the text, written in pencil, was quite legible. Olivia's heart pounded. She unfolded the note, holding it with trembling hands over the table. Art, who was sitting in the living room, heard the unusual silence and rushed in. "Mom, what is it?" Olivia couldn't speak. She simply handed him the note, pointing with her finger at the uneven large letters. "His name is Marmalade. He is 8 years old. He has weak kidneys. Don't give him much salt. If you are reading this, I couldn't do it. I have cancer, last stage, dying alone. It's better for him to live. I can't. I'm from Petrovka Farm, House 12. Forgive me, Marmalade. Forgive whoever takes him. Thank you, Ivan." For a second there was complete silence in the room. Art read aloud. His voice was curious at first, and then it trembled when he reached the word cancer. It was a blow. All the anger, irritation, and feeling of betrayal instantly vanished, replaced by a burning wave of realization. Olivia collapsed into a chair, covering her face with her hands. She was crying, but not out of pity, but out of horror at the magnitude of this sacrifice. She remembered the cat's wild cry, tied to the post, and now understood that this cry was not only from fear, but from Ivan's pain. "Mom," Art whispered, his eyes full of tears. He didn't abandon him, Art. He saved him. Olivia slowly lifted her head. He left him where someone was sure to find him. He tied him up so he wouldn't run away. Everything fell into place. Ivan's rough mechanical gesture, his hoarse, "I'm sorry," his flight without looking back, Peach's wild howl. Ivan didn't want the cat to be near when he died, so he wouldn't be left alone in an empty house when Ivan disappeared forever. Olivia looked at Peach. The cat, hearing the familiar name Marmalade and seeing the collar, slowly approached the table. He sniffed the paper, and his whiskers twitched with tension. His real, old name, written by his human's hand. "So his name is Marmalade," Olivia said quietly. "Ivan, you are the best, most desperate man." Olivia took the cat in her arms. Now she held him not just as a rescued stray, but as a precious inheritance. She pressed him to her. "You understand, Peach?" she whispered. "He loves you. He just couldn't stay." At that moment, as if a months-long burden of guilt and incomprehension had been lifted from his shoulders, Peach let out a quiet but deep, low sound. It was the first true, sincere purr that came not from his stomach but from his heart that they had heard in all 8 months. He nudged his head against her chin. The ritual at the door, which Olivia had taken for waiting for a betrayer, was actually incomprehension and fidelity. The cat didn't understand why Ivan had left. Now he knew that Ivan hadn't betrayed him, but had left out of necessity. The entire atmosphere in the house instantly changed. There was no more bitterness. There was only a heavy but bright sadness and deep gratitude. Olivia put the note aside, carefully folding it. She and Art looked at each other. They had to find out where Ivan had come from and perhaps pay him their final respects. Olivia slowly stopped her sedan by the side of the road. They had finally arrived at Petrovka Farm, following the only clue in the note. House 12. The farm looked alien. To the right, slightly askew, stood a gray house. To the left, about 20 yards away, was another, better-kept one, with a flower garden. Just as she turned off the engine, Olivia saw the door of the neighboring house, the one with the flower garden, open slightly. A dry, wrinkled face of a woman in her 70s appeared on the threshold. The woman was wearing an old woolen shawl and smelled of dried herbs. Clearly interested in the appearance of a strange car, she walked out onto the road. "Who are you here for?" she asked. "We are looking for Ivan," Olivia said. "He lived in house number 12. We found his cat." At the mention of Ivan and the cat, the old woman's eyes widened. She looked with surprise at the shiny Ginger Peach in Olivia's arms. "The cat! Ginger!" she whispered. "You found him! Ivan! He asked for him to be found." Olivia took the folded newspaper note from her pocket. "He left this in the collar. We just found it." She handed the note to the old woman. The old woman, who introduced herself as Anne, read it, and her shoulders trembled. "I knew he wouldn't abandon him. I knew it. He died, dear. About 2 months ago, here in the nearby hospice. He suffered so much because of Ginger." Olivia felt her throat tighten. She asked the question that had tormented her for 8 months. "Forgive me, Anne, but why did he do it? Why didn't he take him to a clinic, to a shelter? Why didn't he leave us any clue other than this? Why did he tie him up like a dog to a post?" Anne sighed heavily. Her gaze became distant. "Ivan was an old-school man, a recluse. He didn't trust anyone, especially your clinics. He thought they would mistreat his cat there. He wouldn't even give him to me, his neighbor. He considered it his duty, his responsibility. We talked, yes, but he would never have asked for help. It was easier for him to tie him up in plain sight in the city so that someone kind would take him, far away from village eyes. He wanted Ginger to live with dignity, not in a cage. She paused, and her voice became quieter. And most importantly, in the last few months, he started having mental health issues. He forgot everything. He understood that soon he wouldn't be able to feed Ginger or take care of himself. He was afraid the cat would fall victim to his temper or starve while he was incapacitated. His heart was breaking when he drove him, but that was his way of saving him. He just couldn't trust him to anyone, not even himself in his last days. Everything fell into place. The rough gesture, the despair, the silence, the inability to explain, the note. A final, heroic act of responsibility. Ivan was right. No one would have cared for Peach as well as Olivia and Art. Olivia walked up to the house and let Peach down onto the ground. The cat stood for a second, unmoving. Then his whiskers stopped trembling, and his body suddenly relaxed. He took a step. He first went not to the porch, but to the old overgrown shed. He stood there, burying his nose in the wood, and deeply, eagerly inhaled the familiar smell of gasoline and tobacco that had soaked into the old walls. He returned slowly, with dignity. He walked to the old, dried-out spot on the porch where the sun used to always lie, and curled up there in a perfect ginger ball. He closed his eyes. He was here. Everything was in place. The smell of his human, even if old, the home, the knot in his heart finally untied. Ivan hadn't betrayed him. Ivan had simply left out of necessity. He found forgiveness and understanding. Peach opened his eyes. He got up, walked over to Olivia, and lightly rubbing his head against her leg, left a few ginger hairs on her jeans. It was an act of acceptance and farewell. A farewell to his former world. Olivia crouched down and stroked him. She knew what she had to do. "You understand, Peach? Now you are free from waiting," she whispered. Olivia and Art said goodbye to Anne, leaving her money for flowers for Ivan and for the fence. They picked Peach up. The cat didn't resist. He lay on Olivia's lap, and this time, when she stroked him, he purred quietly, deeply, without any anxiety. It was a real domestic purr. They drove back. Fields flashed past the window. Art held Peach in his arms, and for the first time the cat didn't flatten his ears, didn't look at the door. He looked at the boy. "Peach," Art said quietly, "now you are only ours." The cat nudged his head against his hand, accepting his new, honestly earned destiny. Olivia, looking in the rearview mirror at her son and the cat, felt that her heart, full of 8 months of bitterness and incomprehension, had finally found peace. The story that began with betrayal ended with forgiveness and love.